boy who watched stars through a broken roof. The monsoon wind howled through the leaky tin roof. Water dripped onto the mud floor as the old fan whirred weakly, trying to fight off the humidity. Sundar lay on the floor beside his mother, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling where the rain painted fleeting patterns. They had no television, no books for pleasure, and very little electricity. But Sundar had something most others in his Chennai neighborhood didn't: an imagination that never slept. His mother, Lakshmi, had sold her gold bangles that week, not for food, not even for medical bills, but to pay the school fees for her son. The gold had been a wedding gift from her mother, passed down for generations. When she placed the bangles in the jeweler's hand, she did not flinch. Her hands were steady, though her heart wasn't. "Your dream is more valuable than this gold," she told Sundar that night. "One day, people will know your name. But you must promise me one thing." "What, Amma?" Sundar asked, clutching her fingers. "When you rise, don't forget the people who kept you standing." Those words burned into Sundar's heart like fire. But the world outside was cold. At school, Sundar was quiet. He listened more than he spoke. The other children mocked his worn uniform and the way he kept fixing his glasses with tape. He never answered back. His only reply was in his results, always at the top, always just one step ahead of failure. One day, a teacher brought in an old computer. The class crowded around it, wide-eyed and unsure. Sundar touched the keyboard like it was a sacred object. He was 12. It was the first time he saw a computer. He didn't know it then, but it would become his future. That night, he stayed, up, drawing what he remembered: a keyboard, a screen, little icons he didn't understand. He asked his teacher questions no one else cared about. What is a chip? How do signals travel? Why does pressing a button change everything? His father, Raghunatha, a simple man who worked as an electrical engineer for the railways, looked worried. "Lakshmi, we don't have enough for college. What's the use of feeding him dreams?" But Lakshmi looked at her son and saw something different. She saw the way he stared at machines, the way he spoke like he already lived in a different world. "He's not made for this place," she whispered. "He's meant for more." By the time Sundar reached class 12, he had walked miles to school each day, studied under streetlights, and taught himself how to fix radios just to understand circuits better. He applied to one of the most difficult colleges in India, Kharagpur. When the letter came, he didn't open it first. He handed it to his mother. Her hands shook, her lips trembled. "You got in," she whispered. He fell to his knees. But joy turned quickly to fear. How could they afford this? The fees, the travel, the books, the hostel. It was a mountain they had no rope to climb. Raghunatha sat silent for a long time that evening. Then he stood, walked to his small steel cupboard and pulled out a white cloth bundle. It was the last piece of gold Lakshmi owned, a thin chain, hidden away for emergencies. "This is our rope," he said. "Climb your mountain." Sundar didn't cry. He couldn't. He knew that to honor this sacrifice, he had to become the man they believed he already was. College life hit him like a wave. The other students spoke English fluently, came from cities, used laptops like second skin. Sundar spoke slow, careful English, and borrowed books from seniors because he couldn't afford new ones. One day, during a project presentation, he froze. The projector failed. Everyone stared. Laughter bubbled from the back. But then something happened. Sundar unplugged the projector, opened it, and within minutes, fixed it. "You should be an engineer," one professor said afterwards, smiling. "I am," Sundar replied softly. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he wrote a letter. It was to a scholarship committee for a college in the United States. He didn't think they would respond. 2 months later, they did. The letter said, "You've been accepted to Stanford. Full scholarship." Lakshmi dropped the letter when she read it. Tears streamed down her face, but she laughed through them. "You're going to fly," she whispered. "My son is going to fly." But Sundar wasn't ready for what waited on the other side of the world. He landed in California with one small bag, a head full of dreams, and a heart full of homesickness. Everything was fast, loud, different. People spoke too quickly. Food tasted like nothing. Even the silence in his dorm room was too sharp. He didn't know it yet, but someone was watching him. Someone who would later try to destroy him. But now Sundar was just trying to survive. And then, one evening, in a quiet corner of the library, he met her. She was reading a book he loved. "I didn't think anyone else liked that author," he said. She looked up, smiled, and said, "I was hoping to find someone who did." Her name was Ananya. She would become the light in his darkest days. But before they could build something together, Sundar's world would fall apart. Because back home, a letter was on its way, and it carried news that would change everything. The storm that nearly broke him. The library was nearly empty when Sundar saw her again. It was late. Most students were back in their dorms, lost in assignments or sleep or the quiet loneliness that often followed international students across oceans. Sundar sat across from Ananya that evening, pretending to read while stealing glances at the way she tucked her hair behind her ear and scribbled notes in small, neat handwriting. She was calm. She didn't speak unless she had something to say, and when she did, people listened. They started studying together, first just once a week, then twice, then almost daily. They shared tea from paper cups and stories from their childhoods. She had grown up in Mumbai, loved mathematics, and missed her grandmother's cooking more than anything. Sundar spoke less about home. It hurt too much. Still, he told her about the tin roof, the broken fan, the radio he fixed when he was 10. She didn't laugh. She just nodded, like she already knew that pain and progress often walked side by side. Sundar had never fallen in love before. He didn't know what it was supposed to feel like. But when Ananya smiled at him, or placed a hand on his wrist to make a point, or called his name softly when he was lost in thought, the world seemed to fall into place. Like somehow in a campus full of thousands, the universe had left him a small shining gift. He should have been happy. But even as he found moments of peace, the world he had left behind began to fray at the edges. One cold November morning, he opened his email and saw a message from home. No subject, just a few lines typed in broken English by his uncle. "Your mother is sick. Come back if you can." Very serious. His hands went cold. His throat tightened. He rushed to call home, dialing every number he knew. But the phone rang endlessly, unanswered. Finally, after 2 days, he heard his father's voice. Dry, heavy, distant. "She collapsed in the kitchen," Raghunatha said. "Doctors think it's the heart. We are in the hospital now. She asks about you every hour." Sundar sat on the floor of his dorm room staring at the wall. He had no money to fly back. Even the scholarship didn't cover emergencies like this. He told himself she would be fine. She was strong. She had survived poverty, childbirth, loneliness. But that didn't quiet the panic. Ananya found him like that. Silent, pale, barely able to speak. She didn't ask many questions. She simply walked over, sat beside him, and said, "We'll find a way." She called professors, spoke to counselors, reached out to Indian student groups. By the end of the week, Sundar had a donated flight ticket and a backpack of food packed by strangers. He flew home with one thought in his heart. He needed to say, "Thank you," before it was too late. When he walked into the hospital room, his mother looked impossibly small. Tubes ran from her arm to a blinking machine. Her hair had gone gray around the edges. But when she saw him, her eyes lit up. "My boy," she whispered. "My boy who flies." He knelt by her bed, held her hand, and placed his forehead against it. "I'm not flying yet," he said. "I'm still climbing." She smiled. "You're already in the sky." The doctor stabilized her. She would need medication, checkups, and more rest. But she would live. That night, he stayed at home, sitting in the same corner where he used to study by candlelight. Nothing had changed. The walls were still cracked. The window still whistled in the wind, but something inside him had shifted. He had almost lost the woman who gave up everything for him. The gold bangles, the chain, her comfort, her safety, her peace, everything. He returned to Stanford with a fire inside him, burning, blinding, relentless. No more drifting. No more hesitation. He started working late into the night, taking up assistantships, applying for internships, and pitching ideas to professors. He slept less, spoke less, but produced more. More research, more insight, more results. His professors took notice. "You work like you've got something to prove," one of them said. "I do," Sundar replied, "and not to you." He didn't mean it rudely. He just meant that his mission was older, deeper, carved into his soul by sacrifice. Still, the pressure began to build. His relationship with Ananya grew strained. She wanted him to rest, to laugh, to breathe. But Sundar couldn't. Not yet. "You're not the same person," she said one evening. "I can't afford to be," he replied. "Not until I repay what they gave." "And what about me?" She asked quietly. He didn't have an answer. Weeks passed, then months. They spoke less. But something else was happening. Quietly, invisibly. Google had launched a new product. Chrome was still an idea on a whiteboard. Android was still a whisper. But the company was growing fast. And it was hungry for talent. Sundar didn't know it yet, but someone inside Google had read one of his papers. One day, he received an email. Not a job offer, just a conversation. "We'd like to hear your thoughts," it said. Sundar prepared for the meeting like his life depended on it. But just days before he was supposed to fly to Mountain View, his father called again. This time there was no gentle warning. "The money's gone," Raghunatha said. "The treatments, they took everything." His father was ashamed. Sundar could hear it in his voice. For a moment, Sundar couldn't speak. The silence stretched. "I'll send money," Sundar said. "How?" his father asked. "You don't have any." And it was true. The scholarship barely covered living expenses. Every month he sent a little back, but it was never enough. Sundar sat alone that night, holding his head in his hands. He was being invited to speak to one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, and he couldn't even afford a shirt that fit. He almost gave up. But then in the silence, he remembered a night many years ago. The rain falling, the roof leaking, his mother's hand on his chest. "When you rise, don't forget the people who kept you standing." He didn't rise by himself. They lifted him. The next day, he went to a thrift store and bought the cheapest suit jacket he could find. It was too big, the sleeves hanging awkwardly, but he wore it with pride. When he stepped into the Google office, he didn't feel like he belonged. But by the end of the meeting, they made it clear. He wasn't just welcome. They needed him. What started as one conversation turned into 3, then 5. Eventually they asked, "How soon can you start?" And just like that, a door opened. But Sundar didn't walk through it yet. Because that night, he checked his email and found a message from Ananya. "I'm leaving California. This version of you doesn't have space for me anymore." She was gone, and Sundar had to ask himself the hardest question he'd ever faced. What is the cost of a dream? And is it worth it if you lose the people you love? The world he almost turned. Away from the first time Sundar stepped into Google's headquarters, it felt like another planet. Everything was bright, open, loud. People moved fast, spoke faster, and seemed to float in and out of rooms filled with glass walls and endless screens. Engineers rode scooters down polished corridors. Whiteboards were covered in colors and ideas, in languages only machines and visionaries understood. Sunlight poured through windows bigger than his entire kitchen back home. It should have felt like a dream. But Sundar couldn't breathe. Something inside him tightened the moment the door closed behind him. The air buzzed with ambition, with urgency, with that silent message written on every screen. Move fast or disappear. They offered him a role on the spot. Not just a job, but a chance to shape the way people searched for information. He would be working with data structures, interface logic, and algorithms that millions would depend on every day. It was everything he had worked for. And yet, as he walked through the hallways that evening, watching young engineers laugh over bowls of free cereal, Sundar felt a sharp emptiness claw at him. He remembered what Ananya said. "This version of you doesn't have space for me anymore." Her words echoed in the silence. He missed her. Deeply. Not just her voice or her smile, but the way she used to slow him down, the way she brought rhythm to his chaos. She had believed in his dream, but dreams, Sundar was learning, could become walls when built too high. He stared out the window at the California sky and wondered what he was becoming. Back in India, his mother was recovering slowly. The medication helped, but the expenses had drained them. His father had sold his scooter. They were back to borrowing money from relatives, and Sundar's success, this dazzling, faraway opportunity, was still only a promise. He hadn't earned his first paycheck yet, hadn't changed anything yet. He sent them a message that night, just a little longer. "I'm close. I'll fix everything." But deep inside, he was unraveling. The days at Google were long. His accent, though soft, made some people lean in when he spoke, like they didn't fully trust they understood him. His clothes didn't fit the way others did. He didn't know the office jokes. He smiled when he didn't feel like smiling, nodded when he wasn't sure if he was allowed to disagree. Still, Sundar worked. He stayed late, read every internal document twice, and started asking questions in meetings. Slowly, carefully, with a quiet confidence that surprised even him. And soon, he began to stand out. His colleagues noticed how he solved problems not with flash but with clarity, how he saw around corners, how he connected details no one else thought to look at. "You see the product like a user," one senior engineer told him. That's rare. But even as his work began to shine, Sundar couldn't sleep. He missed meals. He ignored phone calls. He stopped replying to old friends. And the silence from Ananya became louder than any argument could have been. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. He was asked to join a new project. Something secret. Something risky. A small team was developing a new internet browser. Lightweight, fast, and built from scratch. A browser that could eventually compete with the giants. Microsoft's Internet Explorer ruled the world at the time, but Google wanted something better, something simpler, something that could change the way the world connected to knowledge. It was called Chrome. The team was skeptical of Sundar at first. He was quiet, not flashy, not loud. But in his silence was a focus no one could ignore. He asked the right questions, and more importantly, he listened. As months passed, Sundar began shaping the browser not just as a tool but as an experience. He spoke to engineers, designers, users. He asked what frustrated them, what slowed them down, what scared them. And he built Chrome with one goal in mind: make it invisible. Let the user see only what they need. It was during those long nights, testing, builds, writing reports, running simulations, that Sundar began to rebuild himself. He still missed home. He still missed Ananya. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel torn between worlds. He began to realize that his journey wasn't just about success. It was about service. His mother had given up her gold. His father had swallowed his pride. Ananya had given him love even when it hurt. And now he had a chance to give something back, not just to them, but to the millions who would one day open a browser and search for something they didn't know, didn't understand, didn't even know how to ask. One night, after months of working on Chrome, Sundar sat alone in the office cafeteria, eating cold noodles. The lights above him flickered gently. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a number he hadn't seen in months. It was Ananya. "I saw your name in an article. Something about a browser. I knew you'd do something like this. I'm proud of you. Take care." He stared at the screen for a long time. He wanted to reply, wanted to say thank you, wanted to ask where she was, what she was doing, if she was happy. But he didn't. Instead, he closed his phone and whispered to the air around him. "I hope you know, you were part of this too. Chrome launched quietly at first. There were skeptics, critics, people who dismissed it as just another project. But then, something happened. People began to notice its speed, its simplicity, how it didn't crash, how it seemed to get out of their way. Within months, millions were using it. Then tens of millions, then hundreds. And behind it all stood a man who had once studied by candlelight, who wore oversized suits to job interviews, who fixed projectors in classrooms so no one would laugh at him. Sundar never claimed credit. He always praised his team. Always said we, never I. But quietly, Google began to take notice. Promotions came. Invitations came. Offers from other companies arrived, some with more money, more power. But Sundar stayed, because this wasn't just a company to him. It was a platform, a place to build not just products but bridges, between the past he came from and the future he still believed in. Then, one morning, years later, he received a call he never expected. Larry Page wanted to speak to him, privately. And the question, Larry asked, changed everything. How would you feel about running this place? The weight of a billion hopes. The call from Larry came on a Tuesday morning just after sunrise. The office was still quiet, the sky outside pale and soft, like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Sundar had just arrived, coffee in hand, scanning through emails when the phone rang. It was short, polite, direct. We should talk soon, Larry said. There's something big coming. Sundar didn't ask what. He didn't have to. In the weeks that followed, the conversations grew more serious. Executives began to include him in higher-level meetings. Projects that once seemed distant now flowed through his calendar. But it was the tone that changed most. People listened to him differently, and not just with curiosity or respect, but with expectation. A quiet kind of pressure settled on Sundar's shoulders, like standing at the base of a mountain he hadn't realized he'd been climbing for years. And then, one afternoon, in a glass-walled room on the top floor, Larry Page looked across the table and asked the question, how would you feel about running this place? No ceremony, no speech, just that. For a second, Sundar didn't breathe. He thought about his mother, how she had once walked barefoot to the pawn shop to trade her bangles for his future. He thought about his father, who had spent years carrying a toolbox heavier than Sundar had ever lifted. And he thought about the boy who used to sit by a broken fan drawing pictures of machines he didn't understand yet. And now, here he was, being offered the keys to the kingdom. But Sundar wasn't chasing power. What he feared most wasn't failure. It was becoming the kind of leader who forgets where they come from, the kind who walks through tall glass doors and forgets the cracked cement ones they once stepped over. So he asked Larry just one question in return. What kind of leader do you want? Larry smiled. Someone who listens. Someone who builds. Someone who remembers people matter more than code. Sundar nodded slowly. Then I'll do it. The announcement came quietly to the public but thundered inside the company. Sundar Pichai, once a quiet product manager from Chennai, was now CEO of Google. News articles rushed to publish headlines. Analysts praised the move. But back in Namriti, his office, Sundar didn't celebrate. He sat at his desk with a photo of his parents in his hand, the one taken before he left for the United States, where they stood beside him in simple clothes, their faces unsure but proud. He called home that night. Amma, he said softly. They made me CEO. There was silence on the line. Then his mother's voice, small, almost disbelieving. You mean you're the head of the place? Yes, he said. Of all of it. He heard her gasp. Then a long pause. Do they know what you ate when you were little? She asked. Do they know how we boiled the same rice water 3 times so you could have one more spoon? Sundar smiled. They will. He flew home that December. No security, no press. Just him, a backpack, and a heart that hadn't stopped racing since the day of the announcement. His parents waited at the airport, older now, slower, his mother's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw him. But she didn't cry because he was successful. She cried because he hadn't changed. They drove through the old neighborhood together. The streets were more crowded now, but the houses were the same, small, patched with paint, filled with the smell of fried spices and evening prayers. People waved from windows. Some recognized him. Others didn't. He stopped at his old school. The gates were rusted, but the classroom still had the same wooden desks, the same chalkboards that barely held on to their frames. The principal invited him in. They gave him a chair that rocked slightly under his weight and offered tea in paper cups. "You made us proud," one teacher said, but Sundar shook his head. "You made me possible." He returned to Google with a new purpose. The title meant nothing if he couldn't use it to lift others like him. He pushed for more diversity, not just in hiring, but in access. He began programs to bring coding to rural schools. Championed initiatives to translate the internet into more languages so that a boy in a village who spoke only Tamil could one day Google his dreams in his own tongue. He traveled constantly. Africa, Southeast Asia, remote parts of India. Not to show his face, but to listen. He asked children what they wanted to be. He asked teachers what they needed. And everywhere he went, he found pieces of himself. One day, during a trip to a small village outside Hyderabad, he sat with a group of students who didn't even have internet. They shared one broken tablet between 5 of them, but their eyes burned with questions. One girl, about 11, raised her hand. "Sir," she said, "do you think someone like me can go to Stanford?" Sundar knelt beside her and looked her in the eyes. "I think someone like you can go wherever you want," he said. "You just need a little light and someone to walk beside you when it's dark." He didn't tell her she reminded him of someone, but she did. As the years passed, Sundar grew into his role, not loudly, not with ego, but with quiet strength. He made hard decisions, some that earned him praise, others that brought criticism, but he never stopped listening. Yet, for all the meetings, the milestones, and the memories, one part of his heart still felt unfinished: Ananya. They hadn't spoken since her message. But one evening at a tech summit in Singapore, as he stood by the exit doors waiting for his car, he saw her. Time had passed, but her presence hadn't faded. She looked stronger now, sharper. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the noise around them faded. "You still walk like you're late for something," she said, smiling. "I probably am," he said. They sat at a quiet table later that night, just 2 old friends who once built dreams beside each other. He told her about his journey. She told him about hers, how she'd started her own nonprofit, helping girls from poor communities learn math and science. They didn't talk about the past. Not really. Some things were better left as memories. But before they said goodbye, she looked at him and said, "You became everything we hoped for." He didn't reply, just took her hand and held it for a moment longer than needed. That night, Sundar stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the city below, its lights blinking like stars trying to speak. He thought of everything it had taken to get here. His mother's bangles, his father's silence, Ananya's heartbreak, and his own refusal to quit, even when the world gave him every reason to stop. But what he didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that something darker was coming. A scandal that would shake the company, test his leadership, and threaten everything he had built. Because the higher you rise, the stronger the winds that try to push you down. And Sundar was about to face a storm bigger than anything he had survived before. When giants fall, success, Sundar had learned, didn't come with peace. It came with eyes watching your every move, with whispers behind closed doors, with headlines that twisted your words into weapons. It came with the weight of millions of users, thousands of employees, and decisions that were never entirely right or entirely wrong, only necessary. But nothing had prepared him for what came next. The first tremors began with a single report. A leak. One former employee alleging data misuse. A product integration that may have crossed ethical lines. It seemed small at first, manageable, but it was only the beginning. Soon, more reports surfaced. Privacy concerns, algorithm bias, internal dissent, Employees staging walkouts, protest signs reading "Don't be evil," held up not by outsiders but by people who wore the company badge. Sundar read each headline in silence. Every morning he walked into the office knowing he would have to speak, to explain, to lead, not as a technologist, not even as a CEO, but as a human being standing in front of other human beings who felt betrayed by the very company they had helped build. He met with teams in packed rooms where frustration buzzed in the air like static. "Why? Didn't we see this coming?" someone asked in one session. "Why did we let our values bend for the sake of growth?" asked another. Sundar didn't deflect. He didn't speak in corporate circles. Instead, he said what few in his position would. "We forgot to pause," he said. "We moved too fast. We believed too much in our own story, and we didn't listen when the world asked us to slow down." It wasn't enough. Anger kept growing. Regulators came knocking. Governments began investigating the company's practices. Every news channel, every tech blog, every public forum turned its focus on Google's leadership, and at the center of it all was Sundar. He was blamed for things that had started before his time, for choices made by others, for systems too, massive to control alone. But that didn't matter. The world didn't want explanations. It wanted responsibility. He flew constantly, Washington, Brussels, Delhi, sitting before panels of lawmakers who stared at him like he was the architect of a broken future. "Do you believe Google has become too powerful?" one senator asked, his voice sharp. Sundar didn't blink. "I believe any power left unchecked becomes dangerous," he said. "That includes ours, and it's my responsibility to ensure we do better." But words were no longer enough. Back at the office, teams were divided. Some felt the company was losing its soul. Others believed it was under attack unfairly, and Sundar stood in the middle, torn, exhausted, but still refusing to give in to cynicism. He returned to the basics. He began holding open forums with employees. No pre-screened questions, no rehearsed speeches, just him and a mic. One voice, among many. "Why do you stay?" someone once asked him during one of those sessions. "You've already made it. You could walk away and never have to deal with any of this." Sundar paused for a long moment. "Because walking away would mean someone else decides what this company becomes," he said. "And I won't let that happen. Not when we still have the power to be better." But even that strength had limits. The pressure took a toll. He stopped sleeping properly. Lost weight. Spent entire nights reading legal documents, internal emails, feedback from users. Some messages were kind, others were vicious. One email simply said, "You failed us." And in the quiet of his office, Sundar began to wonder if it was true. Then came the personal attacks. Not just on his leadership, but on his identity, his accent, his background. Social media threads dissecting his rise as if it were unearned. Anonymous comments calling him a fraud, a puppet, a face with no spine. He didn't respond, but he felt every word. It was in that moment of loneliness, when the noise grew louder than his own thoughts, that a letter arrived. Not an email, a real letter, handwritten, from a school in Chennai. It was written by a young boy named Irav. "Dear sir, my teacher told us about you. She said you were once a boy from here, from the same kind of house where the roof leaks. I didn't believe it at first. I thought people like you are born in tall buildings. But then I saw your photo, and I saw your mother. And I think if you can do it, maybe I can too. I just wanted to say thank you. Your friend." Arav Sundar read the letter 3 times. Then he placed it on his desk. And for the first time in weeks, he let himself cry. Not because he was weak, but because he remembered why he had come this far. Not for the titles, not for the headlines, but for kids like Arav, for mothers like Lakshmi, for the quiet, overlooked corners of the world where a dream still meant everything. He stood up, walked to the conference room, and called an emergency leadership meeting. "We're going to rebuild," he said. "Not our products, not our revenue, our culture, our purpose, our promise to the world." He proposed sweeping changes, transparency reports that weren't buried in footnotes, ethics committees with real power, internal reviews led by people outside the company, funding for digital literacy in the poorest parts of the world. Some executives pushed back. "We can't fix the whole world," one said. "We can start by fixing how we see it," Sundar replied. And slowly, something shifted. Employees who had considered leaving stayed a little longer. Critics who expected silence heard action. Not everyone was convinced. Not every wound healed. But the bleeding slowed. One engineer wrote him an email after the changes were announced. "You made me believe again." It wasn't praise. It was a lifeline. But even as Sundar began to steady the storm inside the company, a new one was brewing outside. This one wasn't about data. It wasn't about algorithms or privacy or press. It was about his mother. Her health had worsened again. This time, the doctors weren't hopeful, and Sundar had to choose: pause everything he was rebuilding at Google or risk not being there at the end. He didn't hesitate. He handed over operations temporarily, boarded a flight to Chennai, and sat by her hospital bed every single day. She didn't speak much, just smiled when he arrived, squeezed his hand when he told her about the changes he was making. "They listened to you?" she whispered one evening. "Sometimes," he said. "Good," she replied. "Then speak for those who still whisper." She passed away 3 weeks later. Her final words were soft, almost invisible. "Don't stop climbing." After the funeral, Sundar sat alone in the home where he was born. The roof still leaked. He didn't try to fix it. Instead, he walked outside, looked up at the night sky, and thought about the boy he used to be, the one who watched stars through holes in the ceiling, and the one who would now carry her legacy into every room he walked into. But life was not done with him yet. There was one more chapter waiting, a letter that would arrive years later, from someone he hadn't heard from in decades, and it would open a door he never thought he'd walk through again. The world he gave back, the years after his mother's death, passed in a quiet blur. Sundar returned to work not as the same man, but as someone who had been reshaped by loss. His voice was a little softer now, his gaze more distant in moments of silence. But his mission became sharper. He no longer sought to build just faster products or smarter platforms. Now he wanted something more enduring, something no outage, no lawsuit, no scandal could undo: impact. He looked at Google not as a company, but as a bridge between the world that raised him and the world that shaped him, between the child learning by candlelight and the one holding a tablet in a rural classroom, between hope and access. In the years that followed, Sundar launched programs that reached deep into forgotten places: schools without electricity, hospitals without data, villages where girls had never typed their names. He worked with teams to bring internet to regions with no infrastructure. They used balloons, satellites, fiber buried across deserts. The goal was simple: if someone could dream, they should also be able to search, learn, connect. For every headline about product launches or market share, Sundar pushed for one story to be told: about the people. About the girl in Kenya who built a solar-powered phone charger after watching a YouTube tutorial. About the teacher in Odisha who translated coding lessons into local dialects using Google Translate. About the grandmother in Colombia who searched how to make my grandson smile again and found a community of healing. He kept traveling, he kept listening. But one day something unexpected arrived: a package. No name. Just a return address from Madurai. Inside was a letter and an old gold bangle, thin, delicate, worn from years of being handled. The letter was written in Tamil with shaky handwriting. "You may not remember me," it began, "but I remember you." The writer was the pawn shop owner from decades ago, the same man who had taken Lakshmi's wedding bangles and chain. "Your mother gave me gold once. She said it was for your school." I remember thinking, this woman is mad, giving away her history for a maybe. But I've kept this one bangle. I told myself one day if the boy made it, I'd return it. And if he didn't, I'd pray he had peace. You made it. This belongs to your family. Sundar held the bangle in his hand for a long time. The gold was dull now, but it shimmered in his mind like fire. He didn't speak to anyone that day. He simply left the office, walked until he found a quiet park, and sat under a tree, remembering. He remembered the smell of rain on old concrete, the sound of his mother's voice as she whispered, "One day, people will know your name." He remembered every sacrifice that had paved his path, each one silent, invisible, unrecorded, and he remembered the promise. When you rise, don't forget the people who kept you standing. That night, he wrote a letter of his own. He sent it to the school he once attended in Chennai. Inside the envelope was a check large enough to rebuild the school from the ground up. New classrooms, computers, labs, internet, a library, scholarships for girls, a fund for teacher salaries, enough to erase the word impossible from every corner of the building. But Sundar didn't stop there. He launched the Lakshmi Initiative, a global scholarship program in his mother's name for students from underprivileged backgrounds who showed promise in science, technology, or problem solving. It wasn't about marks. It was about heart. Each student chosen would receive full support, tuition, housing, mentorship, and the one thing he never had when he left home, a safety net. He made it clear, "This isn't charity," he said. "This is repayment." The story went viral, not because of the money, but because of the story behind it. The bangle, the mother, the boy who fixed projectors and walked miles in borrowed shoes. And in a world often hungry for headlines filled with failure and fear, Sundar's story gave people something else. Faith. Faith that kindness mattered. That sacrifice meant something. That success could be soft-spoken and still echo loudly. Then, one evening, while speaking at a global education summit, Sundar told a story he had never shared before. Not in interviews, not even with his own team. He spoke about a night when he was 14, studying late, hungry, but unable to sleep. His mother had walked into the room, carrying the last piece of banana she had saved from her own dinner. She didn't speak. She just handed it to him and sat beside him while he ate. "That moment," Sundar said to the audience, "is more powerful to me than any meeting I've ever had. Because in that moment, she taught me that love feeds dreams long before the world ever sees them." He paused, then added quietly, "And I hope every child, somewhere, has someone who saves them the last piece of banana." The room was silent. Some cried. Others just closed their eyes and let the words settle inside. But Sundar didn't linger. He finished his talk, stepped off stage, and walked quietly into the crowd, shaking hands, listening to stories, giving time. He never saw himself as a hero. He saw himself as a bridge, a messenger carrying stories from the edges of society into rooms where decisions were made. But there was one more thing he wanted to do. One final gesture. Years after his mother's passing, Sundar visited her resting place. He brought with him the gold bangle. He placed it on the earth and whispered, "We got here, Amma. You and me. We did it." Then he stood, brushed the dirt from his hands, and walked away. Not as a CEO, not as a public figure, but as a son who had finally come home.